What if everything you thought you knew about humanity's first death was wrong? Picture a world without funeral homes, without graves, without the concept of saying goodbye. A world where death itself was foreign, until two people changed everything. In the shadows of ancient history lies a story more profound than most realize: the death of Adam and Eve, the first humans to experience mortality. But their final moments hold secrets that have been buried by time, hidden in fragments of ancient texts and whispered traditions. This isn't just about how they died, it's about how death itself entered our world. And by the end of this journey, you'll see their story, and perhaps your own mortality, in a completely different light. By the end of this journey, you won't just understand their story, you'll feel it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see your own life, your own mortality, through a completely different lens. But to understand their death, we must first understand what they lost. And that story begins in a garden where death itself was nothing but a distant warning. Now I have a question for you. Did Adam and Eve die in regret or in hope? Before we continue, write your answer in the comments. And by the end of this video, see if your perspective has changed. Imagine a world of perfect harmony. No thorns piercing flesh, no sweat from endless labor, no aching bones or tired muscles. This was Eden, humanity's first home. Here, Adam and Eve walked in the cool of the evening with their Creator, their bare feet touching soil that eagerly produced its fruit without struggle. Death wasn't just absent, it was inconceivable. Their bodies were designed for eternal life, sustained by the fruit of the tree of life that stood at the garden's heart. Every breath drew in pure, untainted air. Every moment was lived in perfect communion with God and each other. But in this paradise of endless life, there stood another tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, bearing fruit that carried a warning unlike any other. In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Did they hesitate when they first heard those words? Did they wonder what it meant? What did death even mean to beings who had never seen it? The Hebrew phrase God used, mot tamut, carries a deeper meaning than simple physical death. It spoke of a separation, a fracturing of reality itself. Something would die in them the moment they ate, but their bodies would begin a slow march toward dust. They couldn't have understood. How could they? They had never seen a leaf wither, never watched anything fade away. Death was just a word, a distant concept, as incomprehensible to them as color to someone born blind. But everything changed with one choice, one bite. The fruit's juice had barely touched their lips when something shifted within them. Their eyes opened to knowledge they were never meant to bear, and in that moment, death awakened, not as the swift execution they might have expected, but as a poison that seeped into their very being, a slow unraveling of the perfection they once knew. For the first time, they felt something foreign in their souls: fear, shame, the unbearable weight of separation. The day they ate the fruit, they didn't drop dead as we might expect. So what really happened in that moment? What began stirring in their bodies, their souls? And how long would it take before they understood the full weight of that fateful choice? To answer these questions, we must follow them beyond Eden's gates, because their expulsion from paradise was just the beginning of humanity's long dance with death. The gates of Eden closed with a finality that echoed through creation itself. Before them, a cherub manifested, not the gentle angel of Renaissance paintings, but a terrifying celestial warrior. In its hand, a sword of living flame turned every direction, guarding the way to the tree of life. This wasn't just a barrier, it was a divine statement. Paradise was now beyond reach. Their first steps into the wilderness marked the beginning of humanity's struggle for survival. The ground that had once eagerly offered its bounty now held its gifts behind a wall of resistance. Adam's first strike of the hoe into unyielding soil must have felt like a blow against his own heart. His hands, which had never known calluses in Eden, soon grew rough and scarred from daily labor. Eve discovered new challenges of her own. The gentle breezes of Eden had been replaced by harsh winds and unpredictable weather. Together, they learned to create shelter, weaving branches and leaves, eventually discovering how to construct more permanent dwellings. Each new skill was born of necessity: fire for warmth, tools for farming, containers for storing food and water. Their relationship changed too. In Eden, they had been partners in joy. Now they became partners in survival. The blame they had first cast at each other after the fall gradually transformed into mutual dependence. They needed each other now more than ever, finding strength in their shared struggle. The silence of God was perhaps their heaviest burden. Where once they had walked with him in the garden's cool shade, now they faced a heaven that seemed empty. Their prayers rose into vast silence. The intimate communion they had known was replaced by distance and uncertainty. Yet in this silence, they began to develop something new: faith, the ability to trust without seeing, to believe without walking side by side with their Creator. As their family grew, they became teachers by necessity. Every skill they learned had to be passed on. Adam showed his children how to read the seasons, how to tell which plants were safe to eat, how to work with the stubborn soil. Eve taught them how to create clothing, how to preserve food, how to care for the sick and injured, all knowledge gained through hard experience. The first rain must have terrified them. Water falling from the sky was unlike anything they had known in Eden, where a mist had risen from the ground to water the garden. Each new weather phenomenon brought fresh challenges. The first winter's cold, the first summer's scorching heat, the first storm's fury. Eve's first pregnancy brought both hope and fear into their new world. "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord," she declared when Cain was born. Perhaps she thought this was the beginning of redemption, the promised seed who would crush the serpent's head. Each new life was a reminder of both God's continuing blessing and their own mortality. These children would inherit not Eden, but the world of thorns they had created. They watched their children grow, teaching them everything except what Eden had been like. How do you explain colors to those who have only known shadows? How do you describe perfect communion with God to those born into separation? Every question about Eden from their children's lips brought fresh pain, the pain of remembering what was lost. But these struggles were merely preparation. As they established their new life, as they learned to work the ground and build shelters against the elements, they couldn't know that their greatest loss still lay ahead. The death they had invited into the world was about to show its darkest face, because soon they would learn what it meant to lose not just a home, but a son. And not to natural death, but to something far worse. No parent should have to invent the concept of grief, but for Adam and Eve, every new pain was a first, and this would be the deepest cut of all. Their sons, Cain and Abel, represented two paths of human endeavor. Cain coaxing life from the cursed soil, Abel tending the flocks that provided clothing and food. Two brothers working the same earth their parents had lost. The day of offering seemed ordinary enough. Cain brought the fruit of the ground, the products of his hard labor. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, the fat portions, the best he had to give. But God's response shattered their family's fragile peace. Abel's offering was accepted, Cain's was not. We can imagine Cain's face darkening, his hands clenching as he watched the smoke of his brother's offering rise straight to heaven, while his own lingered low to the ground. The first human anger had found its target. The first murder was about to stain the earth. "Let's go out to the field," Cain said to Abel. Simple words, masking deadly intent. Did Abel sense something wrong in his brother's voice? Did he go willingly, trusting his older brother as he always had? We'll never know. But we know what happened in that field, the first human blood soaked into the ground that had already been cursed once. When God asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" the first lie followed the first murder. "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" But the earth itself testified against him. "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground," God declared. And with those words, Adam and Eve learned the full horror of death, not as a distant threat, but as a reality that had taken their son. Imagine their grief, Eve's wails echoing across the plains, Adam's silent tears as they discovered Abel's body. This wasn't the natural death they had been promised. This was violence, destruction, and not from some external threat, but from their own flesh and blood. Then came the second loss. Cain marked and banished, wandering east of Eden. In a single day they lost both sons, one to death, one to exile. The price of that fruit in Eden was still being paid, generation by generation. Now they understood. Death wasn't just about bodies returning to dust. It was about loss, separation, grief, emotions they had never known in Eden. And as they aged, watching their remaining children and grandchildren live in this broken world, they began to feel death's approach in their own bodies. Time began to leave its mark on the first humans. Each morning brought new discoveries of aging, joints that creaked, muscles that ached, vision that slowly dimmed. Adam, who had once named all living creatures with perfect clarity, found his memory sometimes failing him. Eve, who had walked through Eden with boundless energy, needed to rest more frequently. The world around them was changing too. As their descendants multiplied and spread across the land, they watched the first cities rise from the dust. Cain's line had become builders and craftsmen, creating new tools and technologies. Some of their children turned to animal husbandry, others to agriculture, and still others became the first musicians and artisans. But with civilization came complexity. They witnessed the first property disputes between their grandchildren. They saw the rise of social hierarchies, the emergence of wealth and poverty, the beginning of trade and commerce. Each new development brought both progress and problems. The spiritual drift of their descendants troubled them deeply. Many of their children's children began to forget the stories of Eden, treating them as mere myths. Some turned to idol worship, crafting gods from wood and stone. Adam and Eve watched helplessly as the knowledge of the one true God became increasingly dim in the minds of their progeny. Languages began to diversify as families spread apart. What had once been a single tongue splintered into dialects, then distinct languages. The unity of their early family was fracturing, not just spiritually but culturally. They became witnesses to the birth of different traditions, different ways of life. Their bodies, created for immortality, were slowly betraying them. Grey hairs appeared like unwanted visitors. Wrinkles traced paths across faces that had once reflected divine perfection. They were experiencing something no human before them had known: the slow decay of time. The physical decline wasn't the hardest part. As generations multiplied around them, Adam and Eve watched their descendants sink deeper into sin. Violence spread like a poison through their growing family tree. The world grew darker, more corrupted with each passing year. Every new sin was a reminder of that first disobedience in the garden. They became living libraries of knowledge. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would come to them seeking wisdom about the early days, about God, about the natural world they had once ruled over. But increasingly, the younger generations began to rely on their own understanding, turning away from the ancient wisdom their first parents offered. As their strength faded, Adam and Eve must have thought often of the tree of life, still there in Eden, just out of reach behind the angel's flaming sword. The fruit that could have renewed their failing bodies was so close, yet eternally distant. Perhaps it was mercy that kept them from it, preventing them from living forever in their fallen state. They watched their children age and die before them. They buried their own grandchildren. Each death was a fresh reminder of the wages of sin, each funeral a testimony to that first choice in the garden. The words God had spoken became flesh in their experience. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Ancient Jewish traditions speak of Adam's final days with haunting detail. As he felt death approaching, he gathered his children and grandchildren, hundreds of them now, around his deathbed. His voice, once strong enough to name every animal in Eden, had grown weak with age. But his words carried the weight of humanity's first witness. The gathering became a solemn assembly of generations. Some had traveled great distances upon hearing that the first father was near death. Among them were builders of cities, shepherds, craftsmen, and musicians, all branches of the human family tree returning to their root. "Listen," he told them, his aged hands trembling. "What I have seen, none of you will ever see. What I have lost, none of you can fully understand. I walked with God in a garden of perfection, and my disobedience cast shadows over all your lives." According to ancient texts, Adam shared vital knowledge in his final hours, secrets of healing herbs, prophecies of future events, warnings about the growing corruption in the world. He spoke of the promise given in Eden of a descendant who would one day crush the serpent's head. His last teachings became a sacred trust, passed down through generations. Eve, according to these same traditions, died first. Perhaps it was fitting. She who first tasted death's promise would be the first to taste its reality. The ancient texts speak of her final days with particular poignancy. She gathered the women of the family, passing down wisdom about childbirth, healing, and the raising of children. Her last words were said to be both a confession and a prophecy, acknowledging her role in humanity's fall while speaking hope into its future. Different cultures preserve different accounts of their burial. Hebrew traditions place Adam's tomb in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, alongside the later patriarchs. Christian traditions suggest he was buried near Golgotha, the very place where, millennia later, the second Adam would die to reverse the curse of the first. Islamic sources speak of a burial site near the Kaaba in Mecca. The most intriguing accounts tell of the careful preservation of their bodies. Their children, desperate to maintain some connection to Eden, are said to have embalmed them with spices and oils from plants that no longer exist, specimens perhaps carried from Eden itself. Some traditions speak of Adam's body being preserved in a cave of treasures, along with gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the same gifts that would later be presented to Christ. Seth, their most faithful son, is said to have taken particular care with the burial arrangements. According to some texts, he regularly visited the burial site, maintaining it and teaching his own children about their extraordinary grandparents. The site became humanity's first holy place, a tangible connection to both paradise lost and paradise promised. But the location of their actual burial has become one of history's greatest mysteries. Some scholars suggest their remains might still exist, preserved in some hidden cave. Others believe the sites were deliberately obscured to prevent them from becoming objects of worship. The competing claims of various locations hint at a profound truth. Every culture wants to claim connection to humanity's first parents. Their death marked more than the passing of two individuals. It was the end of living memory of Eden. No one else would ever again speak of paradise from first-hand experience. From now on, Eden would live only in story and sacred text, a distant memory of what was lost and what might one day be regained. The silence they must have felt in their final moments, what thoughts crossed their minds? Did they see visions of Eden? Did they glimpse humanity's future? The ancient texts offer hints, but no definitive answers. Perhaps that uncertainty is part of their legacy too, leaving us to wonder, to seek, to hope. The story of Adam and Eve didn't end with their deaths. In many ways, It was just beginning. Their legacy echoes through every human culture, every religious tradition, every story of paradise lost and redemption sought. But perhaps their greatest legacy lies in the promise that was made even before they left Eden, the promise of a second Adam who would undo what the first Adam had done. The New Testament speaks of Jesus Christ as this second Adam. Where the first Adam's disobedience brought death into the world, this new Adam's obedience would bring life. Where Eden's gates were closed by sin, heaven's gates would be opened by sacrifice. The tree that brought death in the garden would find its answer in another tree, the cross. But their legacy lives on in other ways too. Every human's struggle against hardship, every parent's love for their children, every moment of grief and hope. These experiences were first felt by Adam and Eve. They were the first to know what it meant to be human in a broken world, the first to hope for redemption, the first to trust in God's promises even when paradise was lost. Their story raises questions that still haunt us today. What paradise have we lost in our own lives? What fruits do we reach for, knowing they'll bring death? And most importantly, do we live in regret for what was lost, or in hope for what might be restored? As we close this chapter of history's first family, perhaps we should ask ourselves, what would Adam and Eve think of our world today? Would they recognize their own story in our struggles, in our hopes, in our own dance between life and death? The answers lie not just in ancient texts or buried caves, but in our own hearts. For in the end, their story is our story, their hope is our hope, and perhaps their redemption is our redemption too. What do you think Adam and Eve's final thoughts were? Did they die in regret, or did they die in hope? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every perspective adds to this ancient story that continues to shape our understanding of what it means to be human. Before you go, there's one more piece of the story you need to know. You've heard that Eve was made from Adam's rib, but what if that's not quite right? The original Hebrew tells a different story, and it changes everything. Watch the next video to uncover the real meaning behind Adam's rib. It's not what you think.